Thank you all for joining us. I'm Lara Blackman. I'm a senior editor here at the Simon & Schuster audio team, and I'm here with best-selling Simon & Schuster author William Kent Kreuger to chat about his new original audio novella, The LEVEE. Thank you, everyone, for entering the pre-order sweepstakes, and congratulations for winning access to this Zoom event. You can submit questions as we're speaking via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Kent, I'm so excited to be here with you. If you want to say a few words just to, say hi and then kind of start to tell us about the inspiration behind The LEVEE.
Sure. I also want to greet everyone who has joined us today for the Zoom. And thank you for pre-ordering The LEVEE. I hope you've had a chance to listen to it. And if you have, God, do I hope you liked it. Yeah, so The LEVEE was, for me, a very experimental project. I wrote The LEVEE without without any real idea of getting it published. It was for me an exercise in what I do and create stories. I sent it to my agent, because she always wants to see what I'm writing. Sent it to her. She fell in love with it. She contacted the folks at Atria Books, that division of Simon & Schuster that publishes most of my work. They directed me to Simon & Schuster Audio because they thought it might be a perfect kind of offering for S&S Audio, and the rest, as they say, is history. Let's see. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the inspiration for The LEVEE?
Yeah, I think that would be a great way to kick it off.
Okay, so in all honesty, the first scene of The LEVEE began 50 years ago. If you've listened to the audio, you have heard my history of the writing of this particular story. I was inspired to first give it a try in my 20s after I read Faulkner's novella, The Old Man, which is about a convict who is conscripted in the greatest flood of America's history to try to rescue a pregnant woman trapped by the flood. Love the story, but if you read Faulkner, you know how complex his writing can be. It's not tremendously accessible to the average reader. So I wanted to try to write a story that might be a little more accessible. So I gave a shot to writing my own story of the flood and folks battling the flood. Called it The LEVEE. Wasn't all that thrilled with it at that point in time, so I put it away. About 20 years later, I pulled it out again when I was taking a creative writing class at the University of Minnesota. Polished it up, gave it to the group to read. They liked it. All of them really liked it, but they all said basically the same thing. There's a larger story to be told here. So I put it away again. And then when the pandemic descended and I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, but finally ran out of ideas, I went back to the drawer where I put all of my unpublished pieces, pulled out The LEVEE, read it and thought, okay, I think I know how to make this the story it wants to be. So I completely rewrote the piece in the shape that it is today, and I was really pleased with it. Really pleased with it. But at that point, I still had no idea that I would ever try to get it published.
Yes, it's amazing how there's kind of this silver lining of that time that we all had to kind of hit pause on our lives. And, I feel like a lot of people came into a lot of really creative endeavors that way, which is so great. Speaking kind of more about the inspiration, what draws you to this theme of man versus nature? And I know that you've also written about this time period in American history before, so I'm kind of wondering what makes you interested in that piece of it as well, the setting and sort of the themes.
Well, there are only so many things that those of us who are storytellers have to work with, and one of the classic themes is man against nature. And The LEVEE is certainly right there in that area, because it's about people who have built what they believe is a barrier against the worst that Mother Nature can throw at them. And the question is, have they really thwarted Mother Nature and all her power and fury? And so if you were to read my Cork O'Connor novels, you would see that theme arising again and again. For those of you who aren't familiar with my Cork O'Connor series, that work is set up in the Great North Woods of Minnesota. which is an area of tremendous contrast and conflict, actually. It's this rugged wilderness, and the winters up there can kill you if you're not careful. So there's a lot that I write about that pits man against nature in those stories. If you read my novel, This Tender Land, Kids on the River, once again, that is a theme. That's not the major theme of that particular work, but that's certainly a theme that's in there. I just think it's fascinating, particularly when you consider, the hubris of mankind in believing that, hey, we can control nature. We put up these dams, or we've done whatever. You look at what's going on in California these days. 15 feet of snow in the mountains. Nobody can plan for something like that. There's no way that you can best nature when she really wants to throw her fury at you. And I just love that's really rich territory for me to mine as a storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the sort of time period? I know that's also something that you've explored before. Is there something particular about this time in American history that kind of draws you to explore it?
Well, I haven't really dealt well with the This Tender Land. It takes place just a few years later
Right.
1932. And it's less about that particular period than when I deal with books that are not a part of the Cork O'Connor series. Those novels are all contemporary novels. I like to go back and tap a little bit of our history for a number of reasons. Yeah, and maybe the most important reason is that the parameters of the story are already set. There are certain things about history that you cannot change. So it gives you known things and a known framework within which to construct your story. So with the levee, there was this flood, and the flood itself was an historic fact. The devastation was an historic fact. So I could use that as the basis for launching a very, what I think of, imaginative story with that factual grounding for readers to be able to get a foothold in. Did the same thing with This Tender Land, set in 1932. The factual underpinnings are all there, but the story itself then is, in my own estimation, tremendously creative and imaginative. Ordinary Grace takes place in the summer of 1961 or 62, 1961. And so, when you write a contemporary novel, particularly in the genre in which I generally work, mysteries, that involve law enforcement, forensic investigation, police procedure, the ground is always shifting under you, because technology is always changing the way law enforcement operates. But with the past, I don't have to worry about that. It's already all set there. So when I begin a story, I have a very firm footing in terms of how I'm going to construct whatever comes out of my head.
I love that. I love that idea of sort of using historical fiction as a kind of answer to that question of the blank page. You're really starting from scratch, but this way you're sort of working into it via real history, which is a really exciting kind of way to think about fiction, I think. Shifting gears a little bit, you spoke a little bit right up at the top about the process and sort of how the levee came to be. I'm wondering how publishing an audio original felt different to you from publishing a traditional print book. Of course, you've been an author for many, many years, but this was kind of a first for you. So I'm wondering what surprised you about that process, or how you felt it was different.
Well, the process was very similar, except that the folks at Simon & Schuster did just a wonderful, intensive job of promoting this particular piece. I was so pleased with everything that you folks at S&S Audio did, Laura, for this. For those of you who aren't aware of it, there is a Times Square billboard featuring the levee, which just thrills me no end. So being involved really a lot more in the promotion of this work than I have often been with the Cork O'Connor novels. I have particular way I go about doing
Mm.
the other work, but was quite interesting. And and working with you, Laura, as my editor for the audiobook was tremendously helpful. You were able to offer such good suggestions about how I might want to alter that original manuscript to be more accessible for a listening audience. That was tremendously helpful. So I changed the actual text in a number of ways, and via your suggestions to hopefully make it more accessible. So thank you so much for that. You
Yeah,
were
thank you so much. I'm so glad. I loved working on it, and I think your writing style is so cinematic, and it really works so beautifully for audio. But as an editor working specifically on audio projects, I am always kind of thinking about those ways to make sort of storytelling best suited for the format. So that is something that we're thinking about all the time. And sort of related to that, I'm wondering, what was your favorite part about listening to the Levee for the first time? Was there a particular scene or character that you were particularly excited to hear in that first listen?
No, mostly I was just blown away with J.D. Jackson, his ability as a reader, as a narrator. I loved the voices that he gave to the characters. A good narrator, male or female, when you're listening to them, regardless of their particular gender, they create voices that are appropriate for the gender of whatever the character is. And J.D. Jackson just did a stellar job of that. There's a character in the story named Cassidy who's plays a significant part in the chaos that occurs in the course of the Levee. And I really liked uh, the sense he gave this character just in terms of the voice he created for the character. But that was it for the most part. I just loved, and J.D. Jackson gave this the cadence that he brought
Yes.
in the telling of the story. I thought was just so perfect for this. So kudos to J.D. Jackson.
Yes, absolutely. A great reader can just take a great story to the next level. And I totally agree. He was just the perfect pick. So speaking more to sort of the particular characters, as you've already gotten into a little bit, we're wondering why and how did you decide to write this story from Dobbs's perspective?
Yeah, sometimes a story comes to you in a particular way and you just go with the flow on it. And the first time I tried to write the story, Dobbs was at the center of it. And I really liked his character. I liked the world-weary sense of this guy just trying to make it through,
Mm.
you know, after all of the after all of the terrible things that he has had to endure. Here's just one more thing he has to endure. And so I thought that he could bring an interesting perspective to the whole thing. So I loved his voice. Although it's not a first person narrative, it's certainly seen from his perspective throughout the course of the work. So right from the get-go, that's who I saw telling the story, and that never changed. I have to beyond Dobbs, the name Dobbs. One of my favorite movies of all time is Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and the character that Humphrey Bogart plays is a character named Dobbs. And I've always it's a character who goes crazy at the end because of greed and all other things. But I've always liked Dobbs and kind of the character that Humphrey Bogart often plays in his movies, this world-weary guy. So there you go. There was Dobbs.
And as you speak about that, I'm wondering, is that always the case for you? Are you ever working through a story and then actually end up shifting the perspective a little bit to better sort of get the story to where it wants to go?
That has occurred only generally in the initial stages of a work,
Mm.
as I'm trying to understand the voice that's telling the story. It's not uncommon for me in the Corp O'Connor stories to do parallel chapters, chapter one, chapter two, from
Mm.
various points of view to see how the story feels, what voice really feels more authentic in the telling of that particular story. It was particularly true of my novel, Ordinary Grace. It took me a very long time to discover the narrator for Ordinary Grace, to really hear the right voice for the telling of that story. And I made several attempts to write that particular manuscript and wasn't able to get much purchase until the voice of Frank Drum came to me. It actually kind of came to me as I was going to sleep one night, because it just kind of came to me. And I heard it speaking to me as I was going to sleep. And so for those of you who are out there listening to this, I know that sounds really kind of woo-woo. But the truth about storytelling is that there's a lot of, I don't know what those of us who are storytellers think of as magic involved in the stories that you create. There's so much that comes to you, and you just kind of sit back and you go, where the hell did that come from? So there was a lot of magic. There is a lot of magic in the telling of not only the Levee, but everything that I write.
I love that. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you do as a writer to sort of get that inspiration flowing when you feel stuck?
I'm very disciplined in my approach to writing, and so I don't typically get stuck. I write every day, 7 days a week. My alarm clock goes off. Well, it doesn't go off anymore because I'm up anyway. But up about a quarter till 6 every morning, 7 days a week, and I spend the first 2 to 3 hours writing. So I make coffee the night before. Well, back in the old days, I had a particular ritual that I followed until the pandemic made us shelter in place. I would get myself dressed and go to a coffee shop where I would do my writing for 2 or 3 hours. The folks at the coffee shops were always very agreeable because I would acknowledge them always in the acknowledgments at the front of a book. So they were more than happy to allow me to take up room for a while. So I would write for 2 to 3 hours before going home and getting on with the rest of my day. Since the pandemic has made a shelter in place, I've exchanged my kitchen counter for the coffee shop, but I still get up every day, 7 days a week, to write. Even when I'm on vacation, I wrote this morning for almost 2 hours. And so staying connected to the work really, for me, does help me move forward without any significant blockage in the flow of the story. That has typically been the case.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Speaking of sort of your craft, what do you think you'd be doing today if you weren't a writer? Was there ever another career path that you were pursuing or would have been passionate about?
Yeah, I wanted to be a forest ranger. When I was a kid, we took a cross-country trip and visited several of the national parks. And as a kid, I thought, what a great job. You're spending your life working in these beautiful places, these beautiful parks. Aside from being a writer, that's the only thing I ever wanted to be besides a writer. Very briefly, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And then I took an archaeology class and went out on a dig and realized I didn't have the patience to do what's necessary in a good, correct archaeological excavation.
Well, definitely seeing how some of this might have led you to this fascination with man versus nature, all sort of coming together there. And you do still enjoy the outdoors in more of a hobby, right? That's sort of a part of your life still.
Yeah, that's what I love. One of the many things I love about Minnesota. Not very far outside the Twin Cities, you start to encounter that great North Country, pristine lakes and fast, clean rivers. And up in northern Minnesota is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, one of the most beautiful places, in my opinion, on the face of the earth, and also one of the most used wilderness areas in the United States. But fortunately, it's like 8 million. It's a million acres, I think, on this side of the border, and a million acres on the other side of the border, in what's called the Quetico. So even if it seems heavily used, you can be in the boundary waters for days and never see another human being. So I absolutely love that. I love going up to the boundary waters. I'm a big canoeist. I don't fish, but I love to swim in the lakes up there. I love camping out. The smell of a campfire is it's like a perfume to me. So yeah, I still do that as often as I don't do it as much as I used to, because as my popularity as a writer has grown, I have found myself doing more and more and more events in the course of a year across the whole country. So I spend a lot of my time traveling these days, but I still try to get up to the boundary waters as often as I can.
Amazing. Circling back a little bit to your writing process, I'm just taking a look at some of our questions from our audience here. And we are being asked, where do you find inspiration for your characters? And do you ever interject a little bit of yourself into any of your characters?
Well, certainly the main characters, it's hard to write a character that you're going to spend that much time with and not have that character in some way, shape, or form come out of who you are at heart. So in my Corporal Connor series, Corporal Connor certainly, there's a lot that's different about him from me, but who he is at heart is essentially who I am at heart. The values that he believes in are the values, we share those values. Um, if you were to look at both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, you would see the main characters there, you would see a lot of me, particularly This Tender Land. The narrator, Odio Banyan, is like me to a T. He's a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. He was a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout. He is a very resourceful character. I consider myself a very resourceful character. He's quite loyal to those people he considers family and friends. So yeah, Odie and I are like that. Um, the other characters, you can't help but write characters from your particular perspective, even though you try to create unique characters who behave in their own unique ways. They are still shaped, influenced by who you are as a storyteller. And even the villains, or what we think of as villains, those people who sow the seeds of chaos in our stories, we have to understand them in order to create them in a believable way. So probably to a certain extent, we tap the darker portions of our being in order to create those characters. So there you go.
I love that. And I think that sort of complex understanding of what makes a villain definitely shines through in your work. It's definitely something that I appreciate about your writing. I do want to speak to the audio format a little bit. Of course, we're big fans and so excited that, we wanted to put this work out specifically in audio. And I want to hear from you. Are you an audiobook fan? What kind of stuff do you listen to? And what are your kind of listening habits, if any?
Yeah, I'm a huge audiobook fan. I typically don't listen to audiobooks on a normal day, but as I indicated earlier, I travel a great deal these days, and I'm not tremendously fond of flying, so whenever possible, I drive. I drive thousands and thousands of miles every year to do book events or for other reasons. And I never leave the house without having downloaded 2 or 3 audiobooks to listen to on the trip. Because a good audiobook just makes the miles fly by with a good reader. It's just being involved in a whole different world, whole different place, while you're stuck there on the interstate. And I don't have a particular like favorite in terms of who I listen to. Very eclectic. I listen to lots of mysteries because I'm a huge fan of the genre, and I often am listening to the work of my colleagues because when I see them next, I want to be able to tell them, oh, I loved whatever this most recent thing that I listened to is. But I listen to a lot. I have led for many years the book group for my church. And so I'm always listening to the audio of the next book I have to lead the discussion for. But I have to tell you, one of my very favorite audiobook choices, and I've listened to everything at this point, just waiting for the next work to come up from this guy, is an author named Frederick Bachman, who has the same editor I have at Atria Books. But I love Bachman because he's one of the most humanistic writers I can think of. I love his stories. I love how compassionate he is in his treatment of human beings and the human condition. So I have often chosen one of Frederick Bachman's works as I cross the country. Here's another one that I really love listening to. That's another Atria author. Giving my publisher Atria a shout out here.
We love it. We love it. S&S Audio too. We love it.
Yeah, I love Spencer Quinn and his Chet and Bernie series of mysteries. They're just so much fun to listen to. So those are some that my wife and I enjoy as we're traveling.
I love that. I also love the mystery space for audio. I think that when you're sort of so eager to get to the end and so often can kind of listen even faster than you read, it's such a wonderful way to get through, a story that way.
I love when I hear from somebody who's listened to one of my audiobooks that they had to sit in their driveway for 15 minutes waiting for a chapter to end or something to end.
Absolutely. I've definitely been there. So we are at here at SNS gearing up for the publication of your next novel in the fall, The River We Remember. Is there anything you'd like to share about that? Give our attendees here a little sneak peek into that one.
Sure. I consider The River We Remember, which will be released September 5th, to be a companion novel to Ordinary Grace in This Tender Land. Companion in that, like both of those books, it's set in southern Minnesota rather than the northern Minnesota of my Corporal Connor series. And like those two books, it's set in an earlier time. And like the LEVEE, it's set in an earlier time. It's set in the summer of 1958. So it takes place in a small town in southern Minnesota where the leading citizen of the community is found dead in the river that flows through town. And so it really is a straightforward mystery. The question at the heart of it is who killed this man and how did he end up in the river? But like most of my work, there is really a much deeper theme involved in this story. Um, I have written in the past about my father and men like my father who marched away to either World War II or the Korean conflict, and they went away to war kids. They were like 18 years old, 19 years old, just kids. And they came back men very wounded by the experience that they had, the horrific experiences that they had in the war. I dealt with that in Ordinary Grace to a certain extent, but I wanted to go deeper into that question. I wanted to explore the question of when these wounded men came back from the war, how did they manage to heal themselves? And so that's really what's at the heart of The River We Remember, the question of the healing process that has to go along with any great wounding, traumatic wounding. And so I found it a rich narrative to write.
Mm, that's amazing. I'm so excited to listen to it. We're running a little short on time, but there's one question here from an audience member that maybe we could close out with. Is there an early experience you remember where you kind of learned that language had power? Maybe something that inspired your kind of love of the written word?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a kid, my father would put us down at night and he would always read to us. When my mother put us down, she would read stories. But when my father put us down, he read poetry. And so I grew up on great story poems. The Charge of the Light Brigade, half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Or The Raggedy Man. Well, the Raggedy Man, he works for Paul, and he's the goodest man you ever saw. He comes to our house every day to water the horses and feed them hay. Or one of my all-time favorites, The Highwayman. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. And when you read and hear the poetry, the cadence, the power that a well-wrought sentence has, you just learn that words move people in very mysterious ways if you use them correctly. So I thank my father particularly for that.
Amazing. I think that's a beautiful note to end on, Kent, unless there's anything else that we missed that you were hoping to cover here.
No, I just want to encourage you, if you have enjoyed my work in the past or are new to my work as a result of the LEVEE, that you that you give the rest of my work a try, and that when The River We Remember comes out this fall, you give that a read too.
Amazing. And there is an excerpt from the River We Remember at
Oh,
the end of the levee, if anyone has not yet listened or finished. So very exciting sneak peek there for all of you. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Kent. This has been wonderful. And thank you to all the attendees. And we hope you enjoy the audio.
and thanks to everybody for your support. I really appreciate it.